What's up, guys? Level here. Today we're going to be watching some 100 ELO chess. Playing with the black pieces, we've got Capitulated Chris at 104 rating versus not Pau Gasol from Spain at 123 rating. We are in for it right now. I can already feel it. White starts out knight c3. What is black going to play in response? What type of game are we going to get? Pawn e5. Oh my god. He's looking for the big black center. White strikes back in the center. Boom! e4. Huge ego. And it looks like we're going to get a Vienna game, bro. Pau Gasol. Sorry, not Pau Gasol. Might be Hikaru in disguise. Now black has a lot of options here. And we're going for the Vienna deferred center gambit. As you can see by the eval bar, we're going to lose a pawn. But that's okay, because all we did was open a diagonal to our king and lose a pawn. It's fine. It's super playable. I swear. Now, there's a spicy check on that diagonal. We could take. What is white going to do? They took. Okay. Now what would I do here as black as a 1500 player in this predicament? I probably play knight f6. Okay. Now, black doesn't play knight f6. They go for the center. Okay, and that's fine, but keep in mind, like, maybe that was the thought process behind the pawn gambit, is that we're going to play for the center. All right. And I like that. That's cool. In response, white plays an awful move, giving up the advantage. This bishop move to bishop d3 blocks the development of the dark square bishop. Also, if we just think about it, the bishop is kind of blocked off by this pawn and can potentially be harassed with a move like pawn e4. That's just kind of my thoughts on the position. But the best move for black here is knight f6, gaining more space in the center, defending that d5 pawn, so you can maybe potentially free up your queen. There's things happening here. Black plays bishop b4. As you can see by the arrow and the highlight, the knight was afraid of its own shadow, and it went back to the starting square. We get knight f6. Like I said, just developing, maybe preparing to castle, getting some control of the center, protecting that pawn even more. That's what we like to see. In response, maybe if I'm white here, I might play, pawn c3 or pawn a3. a3, not a great move, but, the bishop is a little out of place. White plays queen h5 check. Wow. So the queen is hanging, okay? We just want to let you know the queen is hanging. That is a free queen. Now, I would have to imagine in this position that capitulated Chris forgot to invite his knight to the faction. Because he didn't take the queen, he played king f8. No! No! It was a free queen. You could have won the game. He would have resigned. No! Now you can't castle. Ah! Queen goes back because white realized that it was hanging. Black moves his king again. Now, I don't really think that was a good move. I probably would have played knight c6. I probably would have played e4. White attacks the bishop on the b4 square. Maybe potentially creating a retreat for the move e4. Bishop steps back. Knight attacks the center pawn, but it's not a good move because black can play e4, creating the fork that's defended twice. It's defended twice. If it was defended once, just by the knight, the bishop could take it, and it would be defended by the queen, and maybe we'd be looking at maybe a drawish position. Well, you know, black is kind of screwed because they can't castle, but material-wise, it would be closer to a draw. So black misses the fork. Knight comes in, c6, grabbing more center space. You know, that looks nice. You know, we got both knights, 2 pawns. It's almost like the front of a Jeep. Ooh, not too many squares for this bishop now. Bishop steps back again. White places a knight on the rim. Black blocks the white square bishop with the queen move, d7. There's nowhere to put this white bishop right now. It literally can't move. We're not eyeing up a battery on the f5 pawn because it's defended by the bishop. My guess would be that black's plan is to play e4 and then take the pawn. It's a pretty good plan. It's not the worst plan I've ever seen. Now, white could win a pawn in the center if they take the pawn. Okay? Because if black takes back, queen recaptures, and black has lost another pawn after the gambit. That doesn't happen. White put the knight on c3. It stepped back to its starting square. It went out to the rim, and then he plays an excellent knight sack. Right on the rim, straight to c4. Now that can be taken by a pawn. It's a pretty good exchange for black. Let's see what black plays. He sidesteps the queen to open up the bishop. He forgot that he could play e4. He forgot that he could take on c4. Fascinating game. I would only assume that black is trying to delay the game out to cause mental anguish to the white side. I mean, this is really some psychological warfare here in the 100 chess level. Not level maximum, 100 chess. What does white play? Maybe castles? Maybe we take that center pawn because we have 3 pieces attacking the center pawn and only 2 defenders? Oh, this guy has studied chess before. This guy is a gamer. What does black play? Oh, I don't know about that. I simply don't know about that. So let's take another look. Wow. Bishop d7 actually not one of the worst moves in the position. Impressive find. Impressive find. I can only assume that it's maybe salvageable because now you can bring your rook out to e1. Where would I, sorry, e8. Yeah, e8. That's got to be the only reason that it's salvageable. Still completely winning for white. Okay. Now, what that has done is it's hung this knight in the center of the board. Black can capture either way because the knight has lost a defender and the only defender is the queen now. Now, personally, if I was playing this game, I would take with the queen because the queen would be defended and it would pin this queen to the king. So being up a free piece, I would now be able to remove the queens off the board and I should be able to close out the game with a 1-piece advantage. 1 minor piece, I should say. Queen steps back. Wow. An excellent find by white. Let's take one more look at that. Okay. Now, from the human perspective, this move works because you're creating a fork on those pieces and it's defended. So naturally, you're going to have to sidestep your queen again and lose material. It is a winning move for white. I'm sure there were better ways to create pressure, but this is simplifying the game and winning the exchange. As a rook is worth 5 points and a knight is worth 3 points. The only thing I can say is that maybe I wouldn't make this trade because this rook is kind of useless. And when you take it, the king will recapture. And now the king is on maybe a safer square. And you're going to have to move this pawn to activate this bishop. And you're going to have to remove this knight, which is the defender of that pawn, so that you can bring in pressure with queen h5 and deliver a checkmate. Which is a lot to ask. Sometimes pawns can't move. Sometimes you can't get the knight. Sometimes the knight can be recaptured by this knight somehow. And the h7 pawn remains defended. But okay, white made his decision to create the fork. Oh! Capitulated Chris hangs his queen. So just recapture with the rook. We like to see that. That was at least a 600 level move to recapture with the rook. Okay, a little pawn pressure, a little aggression. Maybe we're trying to open up the diagonal for the bishop. play a check. I like where his head's at. Black knight goes over to the rim. Really curious how white is going to keep pushing this advantage and attempt to win the game. I'd also like to maybe see a castle out of white. White plays check with the bishop, as previously stated with the pawn push. Another king move. Okay, so this guy, Pau Gasol, really loves purposely placing his knights next to pawns so that they can be captured. Nice. Finally punished for that. Let's go. You're going to have a hard time getting out of 100 elo chess if you keep placing your knights where they can be captured by pawns. So far, I think black is playing a better game because they're making less stupid moves. I think they're just panicking under the fact of being in check a lot. Or maybe white pieces being next to the king like the knight was when the king was on f7 and the knight captured the queen. Seems like black, capitulated Chris likes to panic when he's under attack. And no one likes being attacked. So it's a little understandable. But Pau Gasol, I know his name's not Pau Gasol, but I'm just going to call him Pau Gasol. And you're just going to have to remember that it's not Pau Gasol. Keeps placing his knights on squares that are defended for lesser value. It's no good. Can't do that. Okay. Now, white should really castle. If they want to just, you already hung that knight. You want to bring these rooks into the game. Black's at a deficit. This rook on h8 is stuck. And they have no queen. Should be the freest game for white. Okay, we take the pawn. That took our knight. Black takes back. Now, unfortunately, there's a mate in one here. Could have been a genius idea taking this pawn to get a 50-50 chance on whether the knight takes back or the bishop takes back. And it paid off. The gamble paid off because the bishop took back, which means that if he plays queen e6, he could win the game as there is no squares for the king because of the dark square bishop and the queen delivering two deadly diagonals. Okay, we won't play mate in one. We don't want to end the game that easy. We want to toy with our opponent, play h5, and get our rook on h1 in the game with a rook lift, because this is 100 elo, and that's what we do. Now, we could have just castled and played rook e1 and brought the queen down. Something along those lines. We did miss mate in one. It slipped his vision. What does black play in response to the pawn push on h5? Wow. A nice defensive move. Clearly, capitulated Chris saw that queen e6 was mate in one. So he wanted to defend that threat by bringing his rook onto the same file as his opponent's queen. And he can also see that it's defended by his bishop, so he's not even hanging. And the knight, oh, double defended. Excellent. And now the queen is pinned to the king. The only way to stop that is to play bishop e4, but bishop e4 can just be recaptured by the rook, so it would just be a free bishop. We clearly don't want to play that. Actually, there's two ways. Bishop e7, but that is a really tough find. And it might not last you a very long time. I think you'd probably have to give up the dark squared bishop, unless you could play like bishop e7 and then black plays a move and then you play queen e6 and you still get that same mating idea. But you know, white really put a hole in his own boat by allowing this to happen. We go for the rook lift. Man, you know what wasn't a good idea? Playing h4 and going for the rook lift. Because that queen is gone. Now it's at the price of a rook. Let's see how white recaptures. White captures with the king. Now let's see how black can get into this game. If I'm black, I would consider king f7, get the rook out, play check, push the king back, and then maybe trade off some minor pieces. You've got some pretty nice bishops. Plays king f7. Good tactical find. And white chooses to hang a pawn. Black could take that knight g4. There's no defend of the g4 pawn. Black goes for check. King steps back, blocking the rook once again. And black snipes the British sniper, taking the f2 pawn. Even threatening rook e1, which would cause the king to go to c2 and win a rook. That would be nice. We would like that. Okay. White chooses to push the g-pawn because the g-pawn was undefended, now removing the knight from the f6 square. Now, you could still play this move, or you could move the knight. Chooses to push a pawn, very questionable. You have now done what Pau Gasol has done, and you've lost a knight. Maybe it's an acceptable move because you still have access to the e1 check, so that king has to move. Wow. So white greedily takes the knight. What does black do in response to losing his knight? He attacks the rook. Now that's not a good move because these bishops can't defend each other. And there's no way to defend those bishops because the knight's all the way on the A file and the rook is on the E file, which means that it can't protect those bishops. If it were to protect those bishops, it would have to go to E2 and it can be captured. So we don't want that. Now, if white plays H2, he's going to win a bishop. And he's going to have really strong winning chances due to black's lack of connected pawns. And the fact that he has the rook pair. He moves the wrong direction, even giving up a check. Really needed to play H2 there. You know, one thing you're going to learn about chess is that whether the black bishop is here or here, the area next to the bishops is fully protected by both diagonals. It's like they have a fence around them, kind of. The fence doesn't connect on the sides, but you know, the left-right fence can be a pain to deal with sometimes. It's almost like barbed wire. Can't really walk through it, you gotta walk around it. He walked through the barbed wire. And we didn't notice that the rook was undefended with a check. And we also removed our ability to play rook e1 and win a rook. So I'm not really sure what the game plan here was for capitulated Chris. Okay, white takes the g7 pawn, maybe asking if the white king would like to take the g7 pawn. I don't know why he would do that, as g8 is protected currently by the king, by the rook. You know, white can't take this pawn because that's his own pawn, and that would be betrayal. And that's probably a different version of chess. So still, black should take the rook. Let's see what he does. Oh, he takes the rook with check. That is nice. That's good stuff right there. King c2, I would argue, is forced. Because if you don't play king c2, you're going to lose your rook. And we can't have that because we gotta win the game. Now, white's got sort of a miniature fortress here. He's you know, keeping the knight at bay. He's safe on the diagonal. You know, he's attacking this dark square bishop. So I'm really curious what black is going to do here to maintain his advantage. There's really only one good move. I think an acceptable move would be bishop f2. Seems pretty human. But again, that runs into the same issue that previously existed when white had a rook on h3. We got to walk around the barbed wire and attack both bishops. See, now the rook can come to f1 and win a bishop. So you can't play here. You can't play here because then you lose to the pawn. Lose the bishop to the pawn. So there's only one move to safely get this bishop out. And that is bishop h2. And it's quite defended because of this white bishop that defends bishop h, or sorry, defends the h1 square. Now let's see what black plays. Oh, he takes the g7 pawn, really scared of that potential promotion that he was defending twice. Again, as I stated before, it seems like capitulated Chris does not like being attacked. He doesn't like bullies. But sometimes when you try to avoid the bullies, you avoid them so much that you end up walking into new bullies. Like rook takes g1, the most obvious move in the position, winning the undefended bishop and playing a check. Black sidesteps back to the f7 square. And white just wants to get frisky. Just wants this white bishop to move. Not sure exactly why he wants the white bishop to move, but it is an undefended piece, and capitulated Chris has not been defending or moving his undefended pieces. So I could see why Pau Gasol might want to go for another undefended piece, as there's a high chance that he'll just be able to grab it for free. Capitulated Chris moves his knight from the edge of the board, which not only is not a good move, because now there's ideas of bishop b5, setting up a pin on the rook, or even, removing the defense of the c4 square. The bishop can now play a check. And with these two diagonals from both bishops and the rook, there's only one move to play for the king, which would have to be king f6. But the real problem is he didn't defend his white square bishop. Let's see what white does. Takes the undefended piece. We need to pay more attention to the intent of the opponent's moves. Black brings the rook to the center. Seems like he realizes that this check is coming and that he's going to play king f6 anyways and win the pawn while the bishop is on c4. Intelligent foresight in attempt to win a pawn to bring the king over to the h4 pawn and create a passer to win the game. Reasonable, very reasonable. Okay, slides the rook down to a dark square. Now we get rook e1 we get. White takes the pawn. The knight back on the rim. He seems to not want to be checked by the bishop on c4. Pushing the pawn down to f6 because why not? Because we have that option. Okay, I like this. Counterplay. We go from rook e1 to rook a1, attacking an undefended pawn, threatening a check to potentially win the dark square bishop, because this knight defends b3 and the rook will be attacking b2. So when he plays check, the bishop will be undefended, but there is a move to save it. It's bishop b2. We get a white check on c4. What white failed to realize is that the knight moved back to the rim and is defending the c4 square again. So his idea was to play check and defend the pawn, but he didn't defend the bishop. Oh my God, capitulated Chris. Why did you move your knight to a5 if you weren't gonna take the bishop? He must be toying with his opponents. Lots of unnecessary king moves here by the British sniper himself. Get another bishop check. If I'm black here, I would consider... I mean, this looked pretty dangerous because it was one check with a step back. Now you could play f7 check. Now this diagonal's stuck, which means your king has to go this way, right? So it sidesteps. We get a promotion, and this game is cooked for capitulated Chris here. Unfortunately for Pau Gasol, he can't calculate past one move. So he plays a check because he can. He's like, yo, I got a check. It's like a slap in the face, man. I'm going to win this game anyways. I don't need to promote my pawn. Another sidestep. Now we play f7 because we just, we want the king further away. What is black going to do to salvage the game here? I mean, surely there's multiple mates on the board as we're looking at it. The engine says it's mate in 7. We get rook check, winning the pawn. Is he going to find bishop b2? He does not. He sidesteps, attacks the rook. Another king move. Trying to get to safety, but there is nowhere safe. Especially once that queen comes onto the board. You've also hung your rook. Okay, queen promotion comes in. It's not looking good. It's really not looking good for capitulated Chris. He goes to the b7 square because he believes that's the safest place to be. I would have to agree with him. Now, the rook is hanging. I'd love to see king a2. King takes a2. Okay, there are definitely better moves to play than queen f7. Not sure what the exact intent of that move is. My guess would be is that he's trying to get to d5 check. That's really the best move. He's either going for the h7 pawn to create another passer, or he's going for d5 check to push the king out of his safety square and utilize the rest of his pieces. Black pushes the bishop out. Bishop steps back. This bishop's hanging. Dark square bishop. I'm just not sure what black can do here. A very resignable position. And that is certainly not the move you want to play, because after queen takes c7, you have one square. I'll just draw it out for you. There is one square here. You can block with knight b7. If you play a1, there is rook f8, checkmate. And that's basically it for mate in 1, but there's more mates. You could move the knight here, but then you get bishop c5 check, king a8, and even bishop c8 works. Because if you play rook f8, he can block with the knight, and it's mate in 2. So this is mate in 1, diagonal, no squares. Okay. Oh, goes for the free pawn. I would have just delivered mate, brother. C7 pawn is undefended. There's nowhere to go. The king is stuck in the corner. That loses a knight. That loses a clean knight. That loses a knight to a check. Just take the free piece. Take the dark square bishop, man. Okay. Obvious queen move, free pawn into a free knight. King in the corner. We've got mate in 1 if he takes with the bishop. Mate in 2 if he plays king rook. I keep calling the rook a king. That's not good. That's why I'm losing my 1,500 next week. Rook f8, there's mate in 2. As I previously stated, the knight is going to step back and the rook will recapture on either square, and it will be mate. We get queen captures. Yeah, he just wants to keep the queen with the hot hand, you know. He didn't want to take with the bishop. We get king a7. But you don't really have a lot of choices, okay? You can either push the pawn or you can sack your rook. You know, if you could get rid of this pawn and like, maybe give up control of the, the B8 square somehow, then you could sack your rook, play for the stalemate. He's pushing the pawn to h7. He does not know how to deliver checkmate in 100 elo. Pretty reasonable, I would say. I think even something as effective as rook f7, queen b7 checkmate would probably be how I would do it from here. We get a rook sack, king takes, we get king b8. Now we just got to get rid of this pawn and play for stalemate. It's the only option, seeing as we didn't resign like 4 minutes ago. Or maybe like, like 8 minutes ago because of both players' clocks. We push the pawn. There is now nowhere to push the pawn, okay? Unless this white square bishop moves. The pawn is stuck, so we are officially in stalemate conditions. All right, remember what I said about delay tactics. We're going to delay the game to a state where we have a theoretical draw. White plays h7. We get king a7. Now, if white promotes, there will be no squares around the king, and we will get a stalemate. So we definitely have to play another move, otherwise we're going to go to stalemate. And white doesn't do that. We're going to have to give a promotion title to capitulated Chris for having the tactical prowess to push the a5 pawn in a losing game to have only king moves to get a stalemate. Just one moment while I give him his promotion. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, he is promoted from National Master of Britain to GM of Wales